Hey everybody, welcome back to Quest for the Bestest. I am not Timo Nelson, but I'm the closest in appearance to him, so today I'll be your host. My name is Abram Buhner. I'm joined, as usual, by Tanner Dykstra and Tucker Hazel. And we're here today for the next episode of Quest for the Bestest. And we're going to be talking about the best years of our lives. But before we do that, a little housekeeping, do my best Timo impression here.
Yeah.
Last week we talked about Nomadland, which just won its Oscar, its Best Picture slot, and we put it at number 9, right above Kramer v. Kramer and right below Spotlight. So we liked it quite a bit.
And that is out of 27 currently.
Out of 27. And of course, we're going to get into the discussion in a second, but we're on podcast feeds. Give us a little bit of a rating. Give us a like. We're also on YouTube at Backlog Banter, on Twitter, Backlog Banter. You can find us everywhere. Links usually in the description. I don't do these videos,
We're
so who knows if they're
ubiquitous.
there.
We're everywhere. You can't escape us.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, you can't.
I'm sorry.
We're everywhere, especially back in the saddle of Quest. Boys, we are back, and it feels good to be back.
It kind of does, not gonna lie.
Back in the 1940s with a 3-hour drama about war. And boy howdy, what'd you guys think of it?
Well, before we get into it completely,
sorry.
let's say here, we watched The Best Years of Our Lives. It's a romance war film about 3 different veterans coming back home after World War II. It is directed by William Wyler, and it stars Myrna Loy, Frederick March, Dana Andrews, and Harold, what's his last name here? Russell,
Harold Russell, yeah.
who looks far too similar to Tom Hardy, which we'll get into. We'll get into all of it. But that's the film we watched. What are we all thinking?
I liked it. I like I said, it's good to be back in the saddle of a 3-hour drama from the 1940s, directed by somebody that Tucker sings the praises of near constantly. I can't shut him up about one William Wyler.
Well, I gotta say, I'm not doing that for no reason. This man won Best Picture 3 times, so it's not gonna be like this is the end of our conversation about William Wyler. I'm not just pulling that out of my ass. He's actually famous and important.
All right. But I can definitely see how in like a post-war or almost post-war, I'm not sure about history. We talk about movies here. In a post-war America, how this can definitely win Best Picture.
I think that's what's most interesting about this film probably is it came out in 1946. Mm-hmm. So this is not like a retrospective World War II film. This was right when the war had ended. So I think that's very interesting. The movie itself, I'd say it's probably less interesting. Mm-hmm. I watched the first 40 minutes or so and then Snapchatted you guys and I said, there's no way there's 2.5 more hours of this movie. and there are.
There was,
and I think it justifies its runtime. I think it's an engaging movie to watch, but then I went to bed and woke up the next morning and had no recollection that I had seen the film the night before.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We ended up watching it in a little bit chunked up because Tanner got a phone call, we made some dinner, there was a little bit of things in there, and we kept making this joke.
Yeah,
a couple smaller intermissions, but we kept making the joke. We still have a feature-length film left in this film. Because no matter where you slice it, as long as you're slightly over 60 minutes from the end, you have a feature-length film left. And it does... And you do end up feeling that if you keep checking the runtime. But I do think, all things considered, like you were saying, I think this film justifies its runtime. With the amount of characters that it tries to flesh out, the world that it builds around these characters, the emotional arcs that each of them go through, and the fact that it is so packed with content, I think... I personally didn't really feel like it was an unwarranted 3 hours. It wasn't really padded. There wasn't a lot of scenes I felt like, okay, this can be cut and you'll still feel the power of the characters. I think there's a reason this is so long, and I think it works well because of that.
So I agree and disagree. I agree in the sense that with the material presented here, it makes a good case for its runtime.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think there's a much better and much shorter version of The Best Years of Our Lives that could have been made. And my problem and positive with the film really hinges around Homer, who I think is the most interesting and least served character in the film.
1,000%.
I agree.
And I feel like you could either have told the story about Homer in half of the time and double the emotional impact, or gotten rid of him entirely and still cut an hour out of the movie. And I feel like the film just feels at odds with itself in a lot of instances.
Yeah. They do really kind of cram that Homer stuff right at the end. Because, what are the other 2 characters' names? Al and Fred. Sorry.
Yes.
Al and Fred do get a good back and forth throughout most of this movie. And then they just kind of cram that Homer stuff with his girlfriend, or his wife. I always call him...
No,
her,
they get married at the end.
Yeah, they get married.
inevitable wife.
Yes. Okay. His wife and father, they kind of crammed that in like the beginning of the third act ish kind of place. It's just not very. It's not paced out as well as Fred and Al's stories are.
So I think there's two different reasons why the film is paced out like this. A, Dana Andrews and Frederick March are way bigger stars of the time. Frederick March's relation with Myrna Loy, I think, worked really well, and those were sort of the reasons that people were going to see this film. It's like, okay, it's a Frederick March movie, it's a Dana Andrews movie, it's a Myrna Loy movie. I want to see those people. I want to see their acting chops be stretched out over this long period of time, and that was the draw. I think for us, looking back on it, Tanner and I are familiar with Frederick March. He's in Inherit the Wind. Mm-hmm. He's great in that movie, by the way.
Yes.
And it was fun to see him a lot younger. But since we're not familiar with those actors, seeing a more interesting character from someone we're not familiar with, being Harold Russell as a Homer, my bad, is really engaging to us. We're like, okay, I wish this had been fleshed out a little more. Now, he actually is not an actor at all. He was a World War II vet. He had never been in a movie before. Well, maybe he'd been in, I think, a couple documentary things or something. But he wasn't an actor. He was chosen because that his disability, he didn't have hands, and he was good at using the mechanical hands that they had, prosthetics, that they had given him. So they wanted him for that emotional impact. And I think that's also part of the reason he's not really in it as much, is because he probably didn't have the long-term acting chops to really be in a film for an extended period of time. And also, he won Best Supporting Actor for this. Which is, I think, one of two times a not professional actor has won an acting award, which is really interesting. And I think he was great in this movie, so definitely deserved. But the film also won Best Actor for Frederick March, Best Director for William Wyler, Best Adapted Screenplay, Film Editing, and Original Score, and was nominated for Sound Mixing. So this got a whole slew across the board, lots of awards. And I think the ones that have won, I think, are pretty warranted, all things considered. Yeah, that's just my spiel about Harold. I think there are definitely reasons it's paced out that way. It's not just random. It's not really the script them unbalancing. I think they worked with what they had.
Sure. I mean, he was my favorite part, but I think you have a point there of like he was good in the parts that he was in, and that may be to the work of the director and the editor to like whittle down to his best stuff to really have that emotional connection with this guy who's not a professional actor.
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting about the narratives for the other characters is not really themselves or honestly even their interpersonal relationship. I think it's most interesting thematically the idea of them coming home from war and the complex receptions they are met by.
Oh yeah.
Because I mean, from a historical lens, you talk a lot about World War II vets coming back and just being doted over and them being heroes and championed by their communities, and their girls are all there and they're all having sex and there's babies everywhere and they're chanting and everything.
The boomers are born.
Right, and then you contrast that against a war like Vietnam or later wars where there's sort of a disenfranchisement with the servicemen, and that's where you expect to see these stories of them coming home and no one really caring. So it's interesting to see these people come back and to not be greeted completely with open arms, being almost kind of forced into various elements of society begrudgingly. About this. There's comments about people losing their jobs to GIs and the GI Bill and all of this. So it paints a really nuanced picture of America's involvement in World War II and the reception to it. I don't know how accurate it is, but considering the film came out in 1946, I think it's such a snapshot of time that we don't usually hear about.
Yeah. One of my favorite early on parts of the film is that when they're taking the taxi back into Boone City, and it's like that montage of like post World War II America. Gee whiz, folks are back here. It's almost the 50s, and we're gonna be doing great forever.
Everything's perfect, guys.
Everything's
Don't worry.
perfect. But yeah,
Nothing's gonna go wrong.
I also really liked the inclusion of things that I didn't realize. Like people were anti-GI Bill, which is something that I had no idea was a thing. And I think that is a benefit of telling the story directly post-World War II. Yeah.
And I think you brought up something interesting, Abram, is the variety of perspectives that it has. And while it might seem we don't know how accurate it is, I'd say in all likelihood, it's probably super accurate. I mean, the different perspectives that people were giving out, whether this be side characters, whether it be wives or family members or what have you, they're all reasonably reasonable perspectives to have. They're not completely outlandish. They're integrated naturally into the story. They fit the characters' personalities. So I think that, honestly, there certainly were people that felt each of these ways. And I think that's the strongest part of this movie, is the way that it gives you different perspectives from different characters and relationships on what it's like to have someone coming back home. And as Tanner, you were talking about the taxi scene, that's also one of my favorites, not necessarily because of the montage, but because you get to see these guys who are nervous to come home because they have been gone for so long. They don't know how to possibly reintegrate into society. They don't know how their family members are going to react. And then on top of that, you have these three characters that live in the same town, but they live very disparate lives. One is richer, one is poorer, one they have different relationships and jobs and histories. And I think the fact that each of the three stories is so, in my eyes, so interesting on their own. They could have been their own movies, but I think the reason this movie works so well and won Best Picture, in my eyes, is because not only are they strong enough to have their movies, but they support one another. It's the interaction of those stories that I think is so fascinating, that they're pretty separate, all things considered, for most of the runtime. But when they do come together, they bolster each other, and their storylines interweave in interesting ways. And I think that's why I found the movie so fascinating, and why, honestly, it's really up there for me in one of my personal favorites.
I think that those sequences of reintroduction to Boone City and everything is where the runtime is used the best. In these quieter, longer sequences where we can really drink in the atmosphere, we can see Butch's new neon sign and we can have dialogue about it. The movie is able to take its time and walk through these things, walk through the conversation between Al and his son about Hiroshima and about all of these things. There's a lot of nuance in what happens here that would have had to be cut out of a much shorter film.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, I think that the movie works a lot better as a period piece with this sort of social commentary than a romance narrative. And,
Sure.
and I think where the movie started to lose me a little bit is when you're talking about Fred and Peggy and you're having this relationship that just didn't quite work for me. I think, again, there's so, you were talking, Tucker, about there being so many different movies in here, right? And I think that with a little bit more trimming, we could have gotten to the best movie instead of, what we got in the end.
I think it does, though. I think the movie does provide a really well-rounded presentation of all the different kinds of struggles that World War II veterans received and dealt with when returning home. I mean, you have Al, who gets a job as like a loan officer, and his job is he's supposed to turn down other veterans for loans for the GI Bill. He doesn't do that, but that's clearly what he's meant to do. And Al also has the personal issues of fitting back into his family unit and like having a connection with his wife and his daughter and his son. His son, by the way, I don't really like that kid. I don't know what it is.
Of the movie, not
I
gonna
don't
lie.
really know what it is about him. I just don't like him. I think it's his voice, maybe. He's like,
Yes.
"Oh, Pop, were you there when you went to Hiroshima?" Like, shut up, you idiot. But getting back to the main point, you look at Fred and you see the PTSD and the struggling to find a job when you basically lost like the best years of your like career building life. Oh my god, I didn't even notice. And then obviously you have Homer who's dealing with the disability and feeling like he's physically disconnected from other people in his life.
Yeah. For me, I think it's interesting to hear you talk about the romantic aspect of it, not necessarily hurting. And honestly, in retrospect, I think I agree. I think the wedding at the end with Homer was just bloated. It went on way too long. It felt a little forced in how they shoehorned in their relationship to coming to a pretty perfect picture book ending at the end. And Peggy and Fred's relationship, I think, is interesting, and I think it ties in his character with Al's character in interesting ways. They actually end up having a conflict over that, which I think puts them at an interesting odds because they have such a deep connection of we're both veterans together, but then there's, this thing that drives a wedge in between them. I think conceptually the fact that we're getting these characters that are so based around war and their experiences, but then a romance, a normal everyday romance is also included. And I think that humanizes Fred a little bit. I think it humanizes Al as a father, and the way that not everything is about war to these characters, and it fleshes them out. It gives you different perspectives on what their personality is by introducing that extra romance element. And whether or not it's done in the best way, the trimmest way possible, I agree that it could have been handled a little better, but I think conceptually it helps flesh out the movie a lot more, and I would rather have it in there than not at all.
Sure, I can see that. I think for me it's a budgeting issue because I just feel like the allocation of time in the movie across the board feels off to me, and I think spending all this time with what is a kind of more archetypal, love triangle is not necessarily effective. I like
Sure.
certain elements of Fred's relationship with his wife. I think that's very interesting, but I think when you start having it be about Peggy and him pursuing each other and then wrapping up suddenly at the wedding, which I think is flawed, like you said, for a bunch of different reasons.
Yeah.
It just doesn't, it feels like the film loses its own plot there when it's usually, on the whole, good about introducing these intersecting elements, as you're talking about, the ways that the three different men's lives intersect and they see each other in the bar or they run into each other in the shop and everything. It doesn't have that level of organic design to it.
Yeah.
And I think it just stands out to me by contrast.
And that's one of the criticisms of this movie. I like to do this. I'm a big ass nerd. I've got my complete unofficial history of the Academy Awards. I was looking at the Wikipedia entry for this movie. I was learning about what the perception of this was at the time, and it was very highly regarded. This is William Wyler's war masterpiece. By the way, William Wyler was in World War II. He was a documentary maker during World War II. His last movie before the war was Mrs. Miniver, which won Best Picture, so we'll be getting to it at some point. And he didn't make another feature movie until this. So technically he won back-to-back Best Pictures with his features, which is interesting. But he took his own war experience and really worked that into his characters. He and Fred are very similar in some ways. That sequence at the end where Fred is visiting the airplane junkyard and sits in the cockpit and all that, he worked that out of his own experiences and really balanced that with what he experienced. He also lost a lot of his hearing in the war. William Wyler did. So he had to have this thing rigged up that allowed him to hear what the actors were saying, so he could give them feedback. So there's a lot of personal war history and experience woven into these characters, and I think that's why they're so well realized. And while there's a variety of them, because he knew people who lived in these situations and was experiencing that himself when he returned from the war. So I think that's why, at least in my eyes, this feels so complete in terms of perspective and nuance and personality.
Sure. I wanted to ask you guys about something that I caught a little bit. I forget what the word is, but it's like oranges in The Godfather. I forget what the word is.
A motif?
A motif, thank you.
Sure, yeah.
I don't speak French. But it's the use of mirrors in this movie. I caught it quite a few times. They use it in the taxi scene. They use it quite a few times in various bedroom scenes. I was wondering if you guys thought there was anything to that. Maybe it's the characters reflecting on themselves and their own place back at home. I wanted to see if you guys caught that or what you think of it.
I'm sure there's probably something there, given Tucker educating me about the filmmaker and his obvious talent. But I didn't really pick up on that, and to be honest, I think like the Godfather oranges motif is lame, and I think I love that. I love those movies, but it's lame, and I think that the whole mirror thing, I don't know if it would add a lot. I think it's an interesting reading, especially in a film about reflection, But I didn't pick up on it personally.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it. I mean, here's the thing: it's not an obvious enough motif to really make me feel like, yeah, he meant a lot by this. I think also this is just a well shot movie. There's a lot of interesting framing elements and cinematography, and I think the mirrors are just a way to experiment with shot composition, and it mixes it up. Get a lot of this is a very dialogue heavy movie. This is a character interaction heavy movie, and obviously that's one of his strengths. But if you want to mix up it visually, introduce a couple mirrors in there, throw a reflection in there, have someone facing the opposite direction, but you can still see their face because there's a mirror, and it allows it to not just be, a medium two shot of them sitting next to each other.
Sure.
I want to raise a point off of what Tucker just said about the script. I think the script is very strong. I think there's a lot of really great dialogue and a lot of great moments. I think one of the most affecting scenes in the entire film, again, coming back to how great Homer is when he slams his hands through the glass and his younger sister and her friends are up there. I think the script writes itself into some really organic and impactful moments. At the same time, I think it underserves a lot of its background characters. I think that Al's family is not particularly fleshed out. I think probably Peggy notwithstanding, but his son, his wife, kind of.
His son doesn't fucking matter. He shows up like 3 times. He's a C tier character.
Gee whiz, thanks for the sword, Pop.
Or I think another great example is Fred's parents, who there seems to be some kind of tension there, but doesn't really get delved into. I think, again, it's a symptom of the film tackling so much that it can't just nail down every element it introduces. Because I think that you take out some of these characters again, and I think you have more space to get a little bit deeper into theme instead of having, okay, here are these parents that seem almost not super happy to have their son back completely, but then they read his citations for winning the awards and they seem proud of him again. Like, what are we trying to pull at here? And we don't really get the time to actually unpack it.
I think that is a symptom, as you said, of the fact this movie has so many characters in it. This is an ensemble film. You do, for all intents and purposes, have maybe 6 really well realized characters that have interactions and work alongside one another and have arguments and all of that. And then there are supporting characters who are in themselves interesting, like you said, his parents, or the son, maybe not so much. But I think I would rather have touched on interesting side characters when the rest of the main cast is so well realized than have really weak side characters. I think the fact that they have those interesting elements just gives you a little bit more to grab onto. And if they weren't there at all, then be like, okay, where are his parents? Or if they were there and just like extremely one note and no interesting concept to them, it'd be like, okay, well, why don't they have a little more personality? I think they just did the best with how much they have, and they still wanted to have just a little bit more.
My problem with that is I think they are really interesting, and it speaks again to one of these guys maybe should have been removed from the movie entirely to give more space.
Sure.
Because we talked about the son not being important, but actually the idea of your father coming back from World War II and you sitting down and telling him, like, you committed a fucking war crime, like, that's very interesting. I think that his son plays such an interesting part at the beginning of the film that we don't see a lot of. We, of course, get the big confrontation that loses Fred his job. But this sort of pushback, even from the children, is really interesting. We just don't get that explored. I think that's an important component of the film's commentary about these men returning home from war, but we just didn't get enough of it.
Yeah.
Sure.
I did want to talk about, just quickly, the confrontation that Fred has when he's like when he's being a soda jerk or whatever. And he's being a soda jerk, and the other guy's being a real life jerk. Because, good lord, does Fred just lay that guy out? He kills that man with a single punch, I'm pretty sure. He sends him flying back into a glass case, and he just... He's dead, I think.
Yeah, and in the fucking like Nordstrom's or whatever he works at needs to get better glass cases, because that's a weak ass glass case.
Yeah.
It was a Yakuza fight scene. Everything was meant to explode into pieces.
Yeah, exactly.
With one punch, though.
Exactly.
But I do think that sequence, I mean, we're cheesing on it a little bit. I think it's a really good moment in the film. Yeah. It gives Fred a little bit to work with in terms of him defending his newfound friend. It gives what's his name? Harold? No, Harold's the actor.
Homer.
Homer, sorry. It gives Homer this really interesting moment with a pretty surprisingly interesting side character who had some things to say that introduced more conflicts into the film, and I really enjoyed that sequence. I think that it's one of this movie's strongest aspects is to have those really memorable sequences with a plot conflict introduced that gives the characters something to think about and be like, okay, well, why is this happening? Why does someone think this way? And the film is a series of those moments, of those smaller conflicts within an overarching narrative that allow you to get so many different perspectives on it.
Yeah. I think just to chime in on you guys' sort of back and forth about the side characters, I think there is a few that are also underserved that I wanna note. Particularly Al's wife and also his boss, I feel like are also underserved in his overall narrative, because again, they are sort of the primary characters in his struggle, which would be his career and his personal life. And I think had this film been more focused, or had it given more time to all of its main characters, they should have gotten more. They should have gotten more screen time and motivations and things like that.
Sure,
yeah, I totally agree. Are there any other thoughts we want before you send me your numbers on your mobile phone, as I have to do a little Timo math here?
Yeah.
One thing I want to point out is a sequence I love towards the beginning of the film when it's the 3 guys riding in the nose of the plane and it's low and they're flying. I think you get some really nice dialogue there about Homer's time in the Navy, but also just a really interestingly constructed sequence, being behind the guys looking through the cockpit at the ground below it. Tucker, you said it's a very interestingly shot film, and I think that's definitely something to hammer home. I typically find a lot of these films we watch from the era to feel kind of flat visually, but this definitely was not one of them.
I agree.
Yeah, and I think that's just due to the experience of the filmmaker. He, as I said, won Best Picture 3 times, so he definitely has a little bit of skill behind him. But he knows how to shoot these, just straight up dialogue scenes in an interesting way. There's one shot in particular, I think I called this out when Tanner and I were watching it, where it's when Al first returns home and all his family is sitting in the living room, and you have him talking to his daughter with his wife. His face right between their heads, and it's all framed so you can see everyone's reactions to the shot. And I'm like, like they set that up so all the characters were visible and it worked so well.
But there's also the weird thing of his wife in the back, just kind of like smiling and nodding along into the scene.
Yeah.
So
I'd rather have it interestingly
framed very well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tucker, I need a number.
Ooh. Well, can I just tell it to you?
And we'll be back after this break. And we're back, and we have a number, and it's an even number this time, which was nice.
Whoa.
Our number is
thank God.
12.
12? Okay. All right.
Number 12 out of 28.
The breakdown, for those curious, is 8 from Tucker, 10 from Tanner, and 18 from me.
Oh, wow.
Holy God.
Dragging us all down, Abram, like you always do.
Unfortunately, yes. It's a habit of mine, but how do we feel about 12?
So that'd be just above All About Eve and just below Chicago.
Correct.
Obviously, I feel it's a little low because while I wasn't in love with the entire film, I think it serves an interesting purpose in the history of the Oscars and the Best Picture winners as like this snapshot directly post World War II. I think we talked about the brilliant direction from William Wyler. I think we've talked about the great writing and how all three characters sum up the struggle of World War II veterans returning home. So I think the things that it does on a macro level are quite interesting and should rank a little bit higher. But in all honesty, I'm fine with place number 12.
I think 12 obviously dragged down a little bit, a little bit by Abrams. You'll be able to defend your point in a second. Mm-hmm. But honestly, I chose to put this higher because I think that Tanner is right. This is a really interesting snapshot. But also I think when we're watching these movies and we talk about the fact we want something that feels a little bit different, and there's Oscar bait films and the ones that are, obviously there's one Best Picture because the Academy likes to choose a certain kind of films. And honestly, this fits into that Oscar bait category really solidly. But I think it's the perfect example of that. I think it's the gold standard of what an Oscar bait movie is. It's a drama, it's long, it's reflective of the time period, it's got the social commentary, but it also handles all its characters really well. It doesn't really, in some instances it feels a little bit bloated, but I think it warrants its runtime. It paints a really interesting picture of the time period in a way that we can't really get looking back on it. It has the lens of someone who experienced this going into it, and I think that makes it super well realized. And I'm a proponent of ensemble films in Best Pictures, especially when they're so much longer, because it gets you the chance to be introduced to so many characters and be introduced to these actors who I think did amazing performances all around. And I think it just works for me in terms of what I want a Best Picture winner to be, especially if it's an Oscar baity film. I think this is the gold standard for that.
Sure, I think you guys make a lot of really interesting points about its uniqueness thematically, about its just objective success in all of the respects Tucker was talking about as an ensemble film. But for me personally, I think this is a movie that I enjoyed, but could have enjoyed a lot more had it not dulled its own impact at a lot of different turns. I think that had the film been a little bit more focused in a lot of different respects, we could have gotten more interesting characterization, more rich detail, more rich themes. By stripping out a character, refocusing a little bit, we could have gotten the sort of commentary that the film strikes at really connected with. I think it's a really excellent survey, but it lacks the focus I wanted, especially because I was looking at Grand Hotel being a big barometer for me as to which I think is more successful. And that, in my opinion, as a view of Depression-era America with an interesting script, again, an ensemble cast, I think that's a film that from the period that exemplifies focus and at the same time contextualizing its narrative within an interesting portion of American history. Then you move up a little bit and you hit Platoon. Of course, this is a war film from the domestic front against the actual front line. But I think again it comes down to focus. Very subversive, very interesting as to what it's saying about America's combat in Vietnam, right? And then you look at this again, very interesting, and with all the different perspectives on World War II veterans. But again, I just don't think it quite sticks the landing for me in terms of setting up everything it's going to say and following through on it. That said, 12 is still lower than both of your positions, so I think it's probably a fair compromise to leave it at 12. So I'm fine with that. But in my perfect world, of course, my perfect world has Shakespeare in Love at 3, so can you really trust my opinion?
Absolutely.
Christ!
Disgusting.
Oh, that's so gross.
Let's move off of that as quickly as possible, I say.
No, but I mean, honestly, I think that is a really fair compromise considering how much lower you put it. You know, you're conceding a lot more than the two of us are.
Yes.
And honestly, obviously, in my perfect world, this should be higher, but I think we're talking about movies that do a lot of things really interestingly. And of course, we're each putting this into the collective list, which doesn't reflect any of our personal lists. It's a reflection of the combination of said things. So when I look at the top ones, I look at the middle ones, I'm like, oh, I really wish that, Grand Hotel and All About Eve and Chicago were a little bit higher, but I watch this film and I recognize all of its merits, and I think, okay, I'll put it up there because maybe it'll cheese it a little bit higher, but there's a game to all of this and a strategy to comparing your personal opinions to what the list we have now. So there's definitely a balance you have to strike when choosing where to put it, but I'm happy with this placement. I think it's very solid.
Especially since Argo is way too high.
Hey everybody, we are back. We had some technical difficulties without Timo. We hate to admit it, but he's very important to the show. So we don't have a wheel for you this week, but we do have a random number generator I just Googled, and Tanner's going to sing his song. It's still going to be a ritual. Don't worry, your week is not ruined.
Okay.
Now, here's the thing. The wheel song is now incorrect. There's not a wheel, so you're lying to your audience.
Right.
I've always been lying to the audience. And they love it. They love me for it. I'm a man of the people, as I always say. But, Wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us squeal. Is it on digital or is it on real? Wheel, what's your deal?
The number is 23.
Okay.
It's significantly underwhelming, but we got the number anyways. Tucker, what movie do we have coming up next time on Quest for the Bestest?
Now, this one is exciting for me because it's one I haven't seen. We're getting to the point where I've seen most of the ones that are still left, so I'm excited when it's one that I haven't seen yet. We've got the 1990 Best Picture winner, starring and directed by Kevin Costner.
Oh, I know what it is.
Dances with Wolves.
Oh, hell yeah. We're Dancing with Wolves.
This is on Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon Prime. So there's a lot of ways to watch this one.
I'm just glad it didn't come out in the 1930s, 40s, or 50s.
Yeah.
We're back in the 90s, baby. The raging 90s, all right? We're getting nice and radical, my guy, with a Civil War era. I think this is another like 3-hour one.
I thought Dancing with the Wolves was about Native Americans.
Yeah, but I think it's also like I think Kevin Costner's wearing like a Civil War outfit.
Yeah, he
in the
does
poster.
look sort of like that, and it is 3 hours long. Yes.
Yeah. He's got like the mustache that connects into the beard, but it's shaved right here.
Oh, that's
Classic
awful.
look. Yeah.
Well, don't have anything to say about
I'm
it.
excited.
None of us have seen it.
I'm excited mostly because I've been on a personal level. I've been seeking out a 1990 film so I can make a 1990 films ranked on Letterboxd.
Oh.
This will make my 5th Infinity Stone for the year 1990.
Well, there we have it, ladies and gentlemen of the audience. Next week, we'll be back talking about Dances with the Wolves, the 1990 Kevin Costner film. And of course, I said it at the top, I'll say it at the bottom because you made it all the way. Thank you for watching. That's very cool. But also, now you gotta do something for us, right? We gave you this content. Now you give us interaction. Give us a rating on your podcast service of choice. Download our episode. If you're on YouTube, like, subscribe, all of those things. There's Twitter links. There's Letterboxd links to these lists so you can peruse them at your own pace. There's someone mowing outside, so we gotta end this right away or the audio is gonna be borked. Thank you for joining me, you boys, and we'll be back with Timo next week.
Dancing with Wolves.